Hi everyone, welcome to the Studiolo. I'm Maureen and I am an art historian, and this is really not what Renaissance building would have looked like, but I am really enjoying this process of creating a VRLE that students can use to encounter the ideas behind Renaissance architecture and the space that people would have lived in. A studiolo is a private library of an Italian Renaissance princely palace. They were intended as spaces of study for the humanist princes and their scholarly court. They were the equivalent of a modern day office or study in a private home. Only a few people would enter the room at a time. In fact, this very small building, especially I'm looking in comparison to other people's, this is much larger than a studio would likely have been in the 14th to 17th centuries. Um, the visitors to a studiolo would have had access to both handwritten and printed manuscripts, and possibly to scientific and musical instruments, and even relics of the natural sciences. In this VRLE, students enter this loosely based studiolo, and so I will now bring us through entry into this little palace room. Now, I did choose to upload, I guess, download some tiles. This is just a dark terracotta tile. Now, an exterior of a building would not have looked like that, but having these large scale rocks or stone carved exterior is appropriate, and having a large overhang roof would also be appropriate, and having a gigantic door, as you'll see it's much larger in scale than my avatar, would also be appropriate. That scale, even in these small spaces, scale would have been kind of at a higher level. As students enter into the space, you can see this aesthetic really doesn't suit a modern eye. The floor is going to have a variation on terracotta tiles. The walls would have had wooden inlay in a way that looks really busy to a modern eye. This is a little bit excessive. I've just tiled over and over this particular inlaid pattern, with a few exceptions. And then the ceiling would have been coffered, so there would have been texture upon texture that people could encounter. There was this concept called varietas, or variety, where your eye, the stimulation to your eye equals a stimulation to your brain. So windows would have been appropriate in a studiolo because, of course, you need to have natural light in order to work with the written materials that would be typical of encountering. So a student, though, the avatar of a student entering this VRLE would likely encounter this kind of claustrophobic atmosphere of the studiolo and then have the ability to wander around the room. And I've included some anachronistic things in the room, but for the delectation of the students. So it won't pick up on my quick time, but if you are interested, you can download, or I'm sorry, you can play some virtual music from the Middle Ages. There's by Frescobaldi. Let me see if I can get down here. By Frescobaldi, there's a work that is associated with this rough time period of this particular studiolo. You can wander around the room. You can see an image from the original studiolo that I'm going to bring us to on that back wall in just one moment. You can also interact with this book that's laid out on the table. There is a Met Museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. There is an interactive website here. I haven't quite figured out how to make it, besides doing this, how to make it accessible, but it's kind of interesting. Let me see if I can get out of that. But we're going to assume that we're not that interested, so we close the book and head back to this part of the room where hopefully this will work. This is a 360-degree camera, or I guess film, of the actual studiolo of Gubbio. Now, you can't walk through it like a game this is not a game engine, it's just 360 degrees, so you can't get closer. The Met Museum, in the book, you would be able to get closer to the individual walls of this space, but that's not possible through this particular interactive site. If you wished to, you can get out. This is just in Google Maps, but you can get out into the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and you can wander through the halls through the Google Art project. The last thing I wanted to show you was just simply that this library, I did make far too many books, and no, they wouldn't have had, neon colors, but they also wouldn't have been displayed this way. It's something that I would have discussed with students prior to entering this space, is that these actually are anachronistic as well. Books on bookshelves didn't look like this. Bookshelves would not have been open to the air. They would have been more like cabinets, and the books would have been laid out kind of like this one on the table. The learning objective here really does rely on probably a more mature realization of this environment, but it would be to explore the physical space of a studiolo in its Renaissance aesthetic. Ultimately, students would be able to explore this interactive space that encouraged academic engagement on an individual level. I could foresee this being an encounter in especially an online class. I could see developing an accessible project in the space that would allow students to reflect upon their interactive findings in a minute paper or a reflection discussion board. This is my studiolo. I will now exit the space and walk around the building. This is a fun project. I will admit that the aesthetics got a little exciting for me. So I spent probably more time than was needed, but I really enjoyed the process. And thank you very much.